The text message arrived just as I was stepping out of my rideshare at LaGuardia Airport. Don't bother flying in. You're not welcome at the service. Dad wouldn't have wanted you there. I froze on the sidewalk, luggage handle still in my grip, as pedestrians streamed around me. The message was from my stepsister, Vanessa. 3 years of minimal contact, and this is what she sends me when our father dies? I had already missed my chance to say goodbye to him. Now they were trying to rob me of the funeral, too. Little did Vanessa know that Dad had made me the executor of his estate, and that decision was about to change everything. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Final boarding call for Flight 1857 to Chicago. I glanced up from my phone at the gate agent making the announcement. My flight was boarding, but I couldn't move. My feet felt cemented to the terminal floor as I stared at my stepsister's message. Sir, are you boarding? The gate agent was looking at me now, her expression a mixture of impatience and concern. I don't know, I said, the words feeling detached from me. My phone buzzed again, another message from Vanessa. We've already made all the arrangements. The family needs this time together. Your presence would only complicate things. The family. As if I wasn't part of it. As if the past 15 years since Dad married her mother hadn't made us family too. I looked back at the gate agent who was now closing the door. Sir, it's now or never. A decision crystallized in my mind. I'm boarding, I said, striding forward with newfound determination. Dad had raised me to face difficult situations head-on. I wasn't going to let Vanessa keep me from saying goodbye. The 3-hour flight to Chicago felt interminable. I sat in the cramped economy seat, replaying the last conversation I'd had with my father 3 weeks ago. We'd talked about my new position at the architecture firm in New York, about the landmark restoration project I was heading. He'd sounded tired but proud. Not once had he mentioned being sick. More water, sir? The flight attendant's voice jolted me from my thoughts. No, thank you. I glanced out the window at the clouds below. Actually, do you have anything stronger? She smiled sympathetically. Rough day? My father died, I said, the words still, feeling unreal on my tongue. And my stepsister is trying to keep me from his funeral. The flight attendant's professional composure slipped for a moment. I'm so sorry. I'll bring you that drink right away. No charge. As I sipped the miniature whiskey, I scrolled through my text messages. Nothing from my stepmother, Diane. Nothing from my stepbrother, Alex. Just Vanessa's cold directive to stay away. I switched to my email and found the message from Walter Grisham, Dad's attorney. It had arrived yesterday, just hours after I'd received the news of Dad's death from Alex's. Brief, emotionless phone call. Mr. Nathan Reed, the email began formally. In light of your father Robert Reed's passing, I am contacting you as the named executor of his estate. Please contact my office at your earliest convenience to discuss the necessary proceedings. I had been so shocked by the news of Dad's death that I hadn't fully processed what being named executor meant. Dad had trusted me with everything he'd built. Not Diane, his wife of 15 years. Not her children, who had lived under his roof, longer than I had. Me. The plane began its descent into O'Hare, the Chicago skyline emerging through breaks in the clouds. This was the city where I'd grown up, where Dad had raised me alone after Mom died when I was 8. The city I'd left 6 years ago when the tension with my step-siblings became unbearable. I called an Uber from the airport, directing it not to my father's house in Lake Forest, but to the downtown Marriott I'd hastily booked on the flight. I wasn't ready to face Vanessa and the others yet, not without a plan. In my hotel room, I laid my phone on the desk and called Walter Grisham's office. Grisham and Associates, a receptionist answered. This is Nathan Reed. I'm calling about my father's estate. I believe Mr. Grisham is expecting my call. One moment, Mr. Reed. After a brief hold, a gravelly voice came on the line. Nathan, Walter Grisham here. I'm deeply sorry about your father. He was a good man and a longtime friend. Thank you, Mr. Grisham. I'm still trying to process everything. I just arrived in Chicago. Please call me Walter. Your father asked me to reach out to you immediately following his passing. There are some matters that require prompt attention. Like the fact that I'm apparently the executor of his estate? Yes. Are you surprised by this? I sighed, running, a hand through my hair. Honestly, yes. Dad and I were close, but I've been in New York for years now. Diane has been managing their finances. I would have expected him to name her. There was a pause on the line. Your father had his reasons, Nathan. He and I discussed his decision at length. He felt you were the only one who would honor his wishes without complications. Something in his tone made me sit up straighter. What kind of complications? I'd prefer to discuss the details in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning at 9? Of course, but there's something else. The funeral. My stepsister has made it clear I'm not welcome. Walter's voice hardened. That is inappropriate. As executor, you have certain legal rights regarding your father's memorial services. The funeral is scheduled for tomorrow afternoon at Lakewood Cemetery. I suggest we meet early at 7:30 to discuss how to proceed. After arranging the meeting, I hung up and stared out the window at the Chicago skyline. The sunset painted the glass towers in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful view that felt strangely disconnected from the turmoil inside me. My phone buzzed with a text from Alex. Heard you're in town. Vanessa's pissed. You should have stayed. In New York. I typed back, Dad would have wanted me here. 3 dots appeared as he typed a response, then disappeared. Then, maybe. But you haven't been part of this family for years. You don't get to show up now and pretend otherwise. His words stung because there was a kernel of truth to them. I had left Chicago 6 years ago, frustrated by the constant tension with Diane and her children. Dad had understood my need to forge my own path, but he had also gently suggested that running away wasn't the solution. I'm not pretending anything, Alex, I typed. I'm here to say goodbye to my father. No response came. I ordered room service and tried to distract myself with work emails, but my mind kept drifting to memories of Dad. Robert Reed had built Reed Construction from nothing, turning it into one of Chicago's premier commercial builders. The company had been his life's work, his legacy. Now that he was gone, what would happen to it? A knock at my door startled me. Room service was quick, but when I opened the door, I found myself face to face with Diane. Nathan, she said, her voice cool and controlled as always. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore a black dress that looked expensive and new. Mourning attire, I realized with a pang. Diane, how did you know where I was staying? It's not difficult to track someone down in this day and age. She stepped past me into the room without waiting for an invitation. I understand you spoke with Walter, so that's how she knew I was in town. The lawyer had called her after speaking with me. Yes, he reached out about Dad's estate. Diane's lips thinned. Robert made a mistake naming you executor. You've been gone for years. You barely called. You have no idea what's been happening with the company or the family. I felt a flare of anger. I spoke to Dad every week. We had dinner together whenever he was in New York on business. Just because I wasn't living under the same roof doesn't mean I wasn't part of his life. And yet, you didn't know he was sick. The accusation hung in the air between us. My stomach dropped. No one told me. He didn't want you to know. Diane crossed her arms. He didn't want you rushing back out of guilt or obligation. He said you had finally built your own life, your own career. He was proud of that. The words hit me like a physical blow. Dad had been protecting me, even as he was dying. How long? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 8 months ago. The doctors gave him 6 months. He fought for 8. Her voice cracked slightly, the first sign of genuine emotion I'd seen from her. He didn't want treatment at the end. Said he'd rather have quality time than a few extra painful weeks. I sank onto the edge of the bed, trying to process this information. 8 months. Dad had been dying for 8 months, and I hadn't known. Why are you here, Diane? I finally asked. She straightened, composure restored. To ask you to reconsider your role as executor. The company needs stability right now. The employees are concerned. The clients are nervous. Alex has been working alongside Robert for the past 5 years. He knows the business. He has relationships with the clients. And you think I don't? I think you chose to walk away from Reed Construction when you left for New York. You chose to pursue architecture instead of construction. You chose a different path. I stood up, meeting her gaze directly. Dad respected that choice. He encouraged me to follow my own dreams, not just inherit his. And now you want to inherit everything anyway. Her tone was bitter. That's not why I'm here. I'm here because my father died, and I have a right to say goodbye to him. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Diane reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. Walter was going to show you this tomorrow, but I thought you should see it now. It might help you understand the situation better. I took the envelope warily. Inside was a letter, handwritten on Reed Construction letterhead. I recognized Dad's firm, angular handwriting immediately. Dear Nathan, it began. If you're reading this, I've lost my battle with cancer. I'm sorry you're finding out this way. I wanted to tell you, but I couldn't bear to see the worry in your eyes or to have you put your life on hold for me. My vision blurred with tears as I continued reading. I've named you executor of my estate for a reason. The company is in trouble, son. Bad investments, mismanagement. I take full responsibility. I trusted people I shouldn't have, made decisions based on loyalty rather than business sense. Reed Construction is teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. I looked up at Diane, who was watching me impassively. Did you know about this? I asked. I knew things were difficult. I didn't know how bad it had gotten until the end. Robert was private about the business. I returned to the letter. Diane and her children believe the company can be saved through a merger with Tanner Industries. Gordon Tanner has made what seems like a generous offer. But I have my reservations. The Tanners have wanted to absorb Reed Construction for years, not to preserve it, but to eliminate competition and acquire our client list. My mind flashed to Gordon Tanner, Dad's longtime rival in the Chicago construction scene. Their competition had been fierce but generally respectful. At least that's what I had always believed. I'm trusting you, Nathan, to look at the situation with fresh eyes. You understand both the architectural and construction sides of the business. You're not entangled in the day-to-day operations or the Chicago business politics. Make the decision that's right for the Reed legacy, not just the Reed name. The letter ended with a simple, I love you, son. Dad. I carefully folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. A hollow feeling had opened up inside me, a mix of grief and betrayal. Dad had kept his illness from me. The company, his life's work, was failing. And my step-family had tried to keep me away, perhaps hoping to push through the merger before I could intervene. The merger with Tanner Industries is the only viable option, Diane said, breaking the silence. Gordon has been generous, offering to keep the Reed name as a division and to retain most of the staff. Alex will remain in management. And what happens to Dad's shares in the company? I asked, though I was beginning to suspect the answer. They would transfer to Tanner, of course. with appropriate compensation to the estate, which would go primarily to you as his widow. Diane's expression hardened. I was his wife for 15 years, Nathan. I supported him, cared for him through his illness. What do you expect? I handed the letter back to her. I expect the opportunity to review all options before any decisions are made. That's what Dad wanted. That's why he named me Executor. The merger papers are ready to sign. Gordon won't wait forever. He'll wait until after the funeral, I said firmly. I won't make any decisions until I've had time to properly grieve my father and review the company's situation. Diane's lips pressed into a thin line. And the funeral? Will you respect Vanessa's wishes and stay away? I met her gaze steadily. No, I will be at my father's funeral, as his son, as the executor of his estate, and as the person who will determine the future of Reed Construction. Her eyes flashed with anger, but she controlled herself. Very well. I can see Robert's stubbornness lives on in you. She moved toward the door, then paused. The service is at 2 tomorrow at Lakewood. Don't make a scene, Nathan. Your father deserves a dignified farewell. After she left, I sat on the edge of the bed, Dad's letter clutched in my hand, feeling the weight of responsibility settling onto my shoulders. I had come to Chicago simply to say goodbye to my father. Now I was faced with saving his legacy, or letting it go. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Grace Martinez from Reed Construction. I was your father's executive assistant. We need to talk before you meet with Walter tomorrow. There's more to the story than what Diane has told you? I stared at the message, feeling like I had stepped into a business thriller rather than a family bereavement. What had Dad gotten himself into? And what secrets was Diane keeping? I texted back, I can meet tonight. Name the place. The response came quickly. Murphy's Pub on Wells Street, 9 p.m., come alone. As I prepared to leave for this mysterious meeting, I glanced at the Chicago skyline once more. Somewhere out there were answers about Dad's company, his death, and why my stepfamily was so determined to keep me away from his funeral and his business. One thing was becoming clear. This wasn't just about saying goodbye to my father. This was about fighting for his legacy, and perhaps uncovering truths that someone wanted to remain buried. Murphy's Pub was exactly the kind of place my father loved. Dark wood, brass fixtures, and bartenders who remembered your name and your drink. I hadn't been here in years, but the familiar smell of beer and polished oak brought back memories of celebratory dinners after Reed Construction landed big contracts. I spotted Grace Martinez immediately. She sat in a corner booth, her back to the wall, dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. She'd worked for Dad for over a decade, but we'd only met a handful of times at company functions. She looked older than I remembered, with new lines of worry etched around her eyes. Nathan, she said, standing as I approached. Her handshake was firm. Thank you for coming. You said there's more to the story. I slid into the booth across from her. I'm listening. Grace glanced around before leaning forward. Your father made me promise not to contact you until after he passed. He didn't want to burden you, but he left instructions in case things escalated after his death. How? Did it escalate? The merger with Tanner Industries? Did Diane mention it? I nodded. She seems to think it's a done deal. Grace's mouth tightened. She would. Gordon Tanner has been winning and dining with her and Alex for months. The offer looks generous on paper, keeping the Reed name, retaining employees, and a sizable payout to the estate. But, I prompted, Gordon plans to strip the company for parts once the deal is done. The machinery, the contracts, the client relationships, those have value. The Reed name and employees, not so much in his ledger. I signaled the bartender for 2 beers. How do you know this? Gordon's assistant, Marcus, is an old friend. He overheard Gordon on the phone with investors. Within 6 months of the merger, Reed Construction would cease to exist as anything but a letterhead. The bartender delivered our drinks. I took a long sip, processing this information. If the company's in as much trouble as Dad's letter suggested, maybe that's the best outcome. Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. Your father didn't tell you everything in that letter. The company's finances aren't as dire as he made them seem. Why would he lie about that? Protection, she said simply. Robert knew how Diane and her children viewed the company. As an ATM, not a legacy. He was afraid that if they knew the true state of affairs, they'd push even harder for the Tanner deal. I frowned. That doesn't make sense. If the company's doing well, why would Dad even consider a merger? He wasn't considering it. Diane and Alex were the ones negotiating with Tanner, claiming to represent your father's interests during his illness. Grace tapped the flash drive. This contains the company's real financial reports, plus recordings of meetings between Alex and Gordon that your father wasn't supposed to know about. I stared at the small device. Dad knew? Grace nodded. In his final weeks. That's when he changed his will and named you executor. He knew they would try to push the deal through before you could intervene. I slipped the flash drive into my pocket, feeling its weight like a stone. What was their motivation? If the company's successful, why sell it? Immediate cash. Diane has expensive tastes and Alex has gambling debts. They want the payout now, not the sustained income from running a business properly. The information was overwhelming. I'd flown to Chicago expecting to attend a funeral and perhaps deal with some inheritance paperwork. Instead, I was uncovering what sounded like a conspiracy. There's something else, Grace said, her voice dropping even lower. Your father was working on a major project before he died? A redevelopment of the old West Side Industrial Park into mixed-use spaces, apartments, retail, offices. It's potentially worth hundreds of millions. I didn't know about this. Few people do. It's still in the planning stages, but your father secured the rights to develop the property. That's what Gordon Tanner really wants. That property alone is worth more than the entire merger offer. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process everything. So what was Dad's plan? Why name me executor if he didn't expect me to run the company? Grace smiled for the first time that evening. He always said you had the best of him, his business sense, and the best of your mother, her creativity. He thought you could find a third option, something beyond keeping the status quo or selling out completely. What kind of third option? That's for you to figure out. But he believed in you, Nathan, more than you know. As we finished our beers, Grace provided more details about the company's current projects, key employees, and the proposed merger terms. By the time we parted ways outside the pub, my head was spinning with information. Your father kept an apartment downtown that Diane doesn't know about, Grace said, handing me a key. He used it when working late or when he needed space to think. You might find it useful. I looked at the key and address. Why are you helping me, Grace? Your job would probably be safer with the Tanner merger. She straightened her shoulders. I worked for your father for 15 years. He treated me with respect and built something worth preserving. I owe him this much. She hesitated, then added, and I've never much cared for your stepmother. That night, instead of returning to my hotel, I went to Dad's secret apartment. It was a modest one-bedroom in an older building near Millennium Park, with views of the lake that would have cost a fortune in a newer development. The space was clean but lived in, with architecture books lining the shelves and framed blueprints on the walls. On the dining table sat a chess set, a game apparently abandoned mid-play. I recognized Dad's strategic style in the position of the white pieces. He'd taught me chess when I was 7, patiently explaining that the game wasn't about the current move, but anticipating future possibilities. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop and began reviewing the files. Grace hadn't exaggerated. The company's actual financial position was solid. Not spectacular, but far from the brink of bankruptcy Dad had described in his letter. Reed Construction had weathered the recent economic downturn better than most of its competitors, maintaining a diverse portfolio of projects and a loyal client base. The recorded meetings between Alex and Gordon Tanner were damning. My stepbrother had actively undermined several Reed Construction bids to make the company appear weaker than it was, all while Gordon promised him a VP position with significant autonomy after the merger. Around 2 a.m., I discovered a folder labeled simply Nathan. Inside was a video file dated 2 weeks before Dad's death. My hands shook slightly as I clicked play. Dad's face filled the screen, gaunt from his illness, but with eyes as sharp as ever. He sat in what appeared to be this very apartment, the chess set visible in the background. "Nathan," he began, his voice raspier than I remembered. "If you're watching this, then things have played out as I feared. I'm sorry for the deception about the company's status, but I needed to ensure Diane and her children wouldn't suspect what I was planning." He took a sip of water before continuing. "I've spent my life building Reed Construction. It's not just a company to me. It's a legacy, a contribution to the city we both love. I couldn't bear to see it dismantled for quick profit." He coughed, a painful sound that made me wince. "But I also understand that construction was my dream, not yours. You've built your own path, your own expertise. I'm proud of you for that." Tears blurred my vision as he continued. "I'm leaving you with options, son. You can sell the company if that's what you think is best. You can bring in management to run it while you remain in New York. Or you can find another solution that preserves what's worth preserving while allowing for necessary change." He leaned closer to the camera. "Whatever you decide, don't let Diane or her children rush you. And don't let Gordon Tanner anywhere near the West Side project. That land has the potential to transform an entire neighborhood for the better, not just line the pockets of investors." Dad reached for something off-screen, then held up an old photograph of himself and my mother, standing in front of the first Reed Construction office. They looked so young, so full of hope. "Your mother would be proud of the man you've become. She always said you had wings too big for a small pond. Maybe it's time to build a bigger pond." The video ended, leaving me staring at my own reflection in the dark screen. I slept on Dad's couch that night, surrounded by the evidence of his foresight and the weight of his expectations. When I woke at dawn, I had the beginnings of a plan. Walter Grisham's office occupied the corner of a sleek downtown high-rise with views of the Chicago River. The lawyer greeted me with a firm handshake and genuine sympathy in his eyes. "You look like you haven't slept," he observed, leading me to a conference room where coffee and pastries waited. "I've been reviewing some interesting documents," I said, placing the flash drive on the table, "including the real financial statements for Reed Construction." Walter's eyebrows rose slightly. "I see Grace found you." "You knew about this?" "Your father confided in me, yes. Attorney-client privilege prevented me from being the one to share those files with you." I poured myself coffee. "So the merger with Tanner Industries? A terrible idea in my professional opinion. Gordon would gut the company and fire most of the staff within a year. And yet Diane and Alex are pushing for it." Walter nodded grimly. "They've been rather persistent. Gordon has offered them significant personal incentives beyond the official terms." "Bribes?" I asked bluntly. "Let's call them consulting contracts. Lucrative ones with minimal obligations." I outlined what I'd learned about the West Side project. Walter confirmed its potential value and explained that the development rights were held personally by my father, not by Reed Construction. "Those rights transfer to you directly, not to the estate," he said. "Robert was quite specific about that. Diane isn't aware of this arrangement." The implications were significant. Even if the merger went through, I would control the most valuable asset, a card my father had kept hidden until the end. "Now, about the funeral," Walter continued, checking his watch. As executor, you have the legal right to attend regardless of what your stepsister says. The service is scheduled for 2 p.m., with a private burial for family only. I suggest we arrive early to avoid any unpleasantness. I nodded, though unpleasantness seemed like an understatement for what Vanessa might attempt. What about reading? I asked. Scheduled for tomorrow morning here at my office. All interested parties have been notified. Walter hesitated. There are some surprising provisions that Diane and her children won't appreciate. More surprises? Dad has been full of those lately. Walter's expression softened. He was protecting what mattered most to him, his legacy and your future. Robert was always a chess player, thinking several moves ahead. After our meeting, I had a few hours before the funeral. I used the time to visit Reed Construction Headquarters, a modest 4-story building in the West Loop that Dad had purchased and renovated 20 years ago. The receptionist's eyes widened when I introduced myself. Word of my arrival in Chicago had clearly spread. She immediately called Alex, who appeared moments later, his face a careful mask of professionalism. "Nathan," he said stiffly, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Just thought I'd visit Dad's office before the funeral," I replied, evenly. "For old time's sake." Alex hesitated, clearly torn between maintaining appearances and preventing me from poking around. "Of course, I'll show you up." Dad's corner office was unchanged from my last visit years ago. The same solid oak desk, the framed architectural lie, drawings of his favorite Chicago buildings, the wall of photos documenting Reed Construction's major projects through the decades. "Diane has been sorting through his personal items," Alex said, hovering nervously as I examined the room. "We weren't sure if you'd want anything." "How thoughtful," I murmured, noting that Dad's computer was missing. "I assume you've been running things during Dad's illness?" Alex straightened. "Someone had to step up. The transition has been challenging, but I've maintained client relationships and kept projects moving forward, while simultaneously negotiating the company's sale to your father's biggest competitor." His face flushed. "The merger is a sound business decision. Gordon Tanner has the resources to take Reed Construction to the next level." "Is that what Dad wanted?" "Dad wasn't thinking clearly near the end," Alex said, his tone softening into something practiced and rehearsed. The cancer medications affected his judgment. He was making decisions based on sentiment rather than business sense. "Like naming me executor instead of Diane?" Alex's expression hardened. "That was a mistake, one we hope you'll rectify by supporting the merger." I walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. So many of those buildings had Reed Construction's imprint, the craftsmanship, the attention to detail that had been Dad's hallmark. "I'll be reviewing all options before making any decisions," I said finally. "As an executor, that's my responsibility." "Vanessa won't be happy to see you at the funeral," Alex said, changing tactics. "She's been organizing everything, working with the minister, arranging the flowers. Your appearance will upset her." "I'm not coming to upset anyone. I'm coming to say goodbye to my father." Alex sighed. "You always did what you wanted, didn't you, Nathan? Left when it got difficult, abandoned Dad when he remarried, and now you're swooping back in to claim control." The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. I had left Chicago when tensions with my new stepfamily became unbearable. But the narrative that I'd abandoned Dad was their creation, not reality. "I never abandoned him," I said quietly. "We spoke every week. We had dinner whenever he was in New York. He visited me more often than you know." Alex's surprise was evident. "He never mentioned—" "Did you ask?" I interrupted. "Or did you and Vanessa and Diane just assume I was out of his life because it was easier for you that way?" Before he could respond, my phone rang. Walter Grisham, calling to remind me it was time to head to the funeral. "I need to go," I said, moving toward the door. "I'll see you at the service." "Nathan?" Alex called as I reached the hallway. "Whatever you're planning, don't make this harder than it needs to be, for all our sake." I paused without turning back. "I'm not planning anything, Alex. I'm just honoring Dad's wishes. Maybe you should consider doing the same." As I left Reed Construction, I noticed employees watching me curiously. To them, I was the prodigal son returned at a moment of crisis. They didn't know that I had no intention of staying, or that my father had entrusted me with determining their futures. My phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. Diane's pushing for a quick vote on the merger. Be prepared." The chess game was accelerating, pieces moving into position faster than I had anticipated. But as Dad had taught me long ago, sometimes the best strategy isn't obvious until several moves into the game. I texted back, "Tell the board members I'll be attending. As executor and majority shareholder, it was time to make my position clear." My stepsister might have locked me out of Dad's funeral planning, but she couldn't lock me out of his legacy. And she had no idea what moves I had left to play. Lakewood Cemetery spread across 30 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds on Chicago's north side. Dad had chosen his final resting place years ago, a spot beneath a towering oak tree, not far from where my mother had been buried 25 years earlier. Walter Grisham and I arrived 45 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. The funeral home had set up a white canopy over rows of chairs facing the casket, which sat on a platform draped in dark blue fabric, Dad's favorite color. "We're early," Walter observed, checking his watch. "The family hasn't arrived yet." "Good. I'd like a moment alone with him." Walter nodded, understanding. "I'll wait by the entrance to manage the situation when they arrive." I approached the casket alone, my footsteps silent on the manicured grass. The funeral home had done a good job. Dad looked peaceful, dressed in his best suit with his hands folded over his chest. I placed my hand on the polished wood of the casket. "I'm here, Dad," I said softly. "Sorry it took a funeral for me to come home." I stood there for several minutes, saying a private goodbye and making a silent promise to protect what he had built. A discreet cough behind me signaled Walter's return. "They're here," he said quietly. I turned to see 3 black town cars pulling into the cemetery's circular drive. Diane emerged from the first vehicle, elegant in her mourning attire, followed by Vanessa, whose face darkened visibly when she spotted me. Alex exited the second car, along with a group of people I recognized as longtime Reed Construction executives. The third car delivered distant relatives and family friends. Vanessa broke away from the group, marching toward me with determined strides, her face a mask of cold fury. "What are you doing here?" she hissed once she was close enough. "I told you that you weren't welcome." "I'm saying goodbye to my father," I replied calmly. "I have every right to be here." "Rights?" She gave a bitter laugh. "Where were your rights when he was dying? When he needed family around him? You abandoned him years ago." "That's not true, Vanessa. Dad and I remained close. Just because I wasn't living in Chicago doesn't mean I wasn't part of his life." "You're delusional." Her voice trembled with anger. "You have no idea what these last months have been like. The hospital visits, the medications, the nights when he couldn't sleep from the pain." I felt a stab of guilt. She was right about that part. I hadn't been there for his illness. "I would have come if I'd known," I said softly. "Well, you didn't know because he didn't want you to know." Her accusation hung in the air between us. "He protected you until the end, while the rest of us lived the reality." Before I could respond, Walter stepped forward. "Ms. Hargrove, this is hardly the time or place for such discussions. Your father's service is about to begin, and Nathan has every legal right to be here as Robert's son and the executor of his estate." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Executor? That's impossible. Diane is the executor." "I'm afraid not," Walter said with professional detachment. "Robert was quite clear in his instructions." The color drained from Vanessa's face as she processed this information. She looked back at Diane, who was watching our confrontation from a distance, her expression unreadable. "This isn't over," Vanessa said, turning back to me. "But I won't make a scene at Dad's funeral." As she walked away, I noticed Alex approaching, his face a careful mask of neutrality. "Couldn't you have waited until tomorrow?" he asked in a low voice. "Today should be about Dad, not legal maneuvers." "I agree," I said. "I'm just here to say goodbye, same as you." Alex studied me for a moment, then nodded slightly. "Stay toward the back during the service. It'll be easier that way." It wasn't the warm welcome I might have hoped for, but it was a grudging acceptance of my presence. I took a seat in the last row as other mourners began to arrive. The service was dignified and mercifully brief, as Dad would have wanted. The Sibai minister spoke of Robert Reed's contributions to Chicago's skyline, his generosity to employees, and his unwavering integrity in business. 3 longtime colleagues shared memories that brought both tears and gentle laughter from the assembled mourners. Noticeably, no one from the immediate family spoke. I had prepared remarks but hadn't been included in the program. Clearly, Vanessa's doing. Still, I was grateful simply to be present, to hear others speak of the man my father had been to the world. After the service, as attendees filed past the casket for final goodbyes, I noticed a young woman I didn't recognize hanging back from the crowd. She was perhaps 30, with auburn hair and a hesitant manner that suggested she wasn't sure if she belonged. As I approached her, she looked up with startled green eyes. "Are you Nathan?" she asked. "Yes. I'm sorry. Have we met?" She shook her head. "No, but your father talked about you often. I'm Emma Lawson. I was working with Robert on the West Side Development Project." Understanding dawned. "You're the architect he hired." Emma nodded. "We were finalizing the master plan when he became too ill to continue. He was very passionate about creating something meaningful with that property." "I'd like to hear more about the project," I said. "Dad left me the development rights, but I don't have all the details." Surprise flickered across her face. "He left them to you? That's unexpected." "Why?" She hesitated. "It's just that Gordon Tanner has been acting as though the project would be his once the merger went through. He's already approached me about revisions to the plan." Her expression made it clear what she thought of Tanner's ideas. "The merger isn't a done deal," I said firmly. "And the West Side project isn't part of Reed Construction's assets. It belongs to me now." Relief softened her features. "Your father would be glad to hear that. He didn't want Tanner anywhere near this development. It was too important to him." "I'd like to review the plans as soon as possible," I said, handing her my card. "Can you meet tomorrow?" "Of course." She tucked the card into her purse. "And Nathan, I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man." As Emma walked away, I noticed Diane watching our interaction with narrowed eyes. She approached once Emma was out of earshot. "Making new allies already?" Her tone was cool, her smile tight. "Just paying my respects to someone who worked with Dad." Diane adjusted her black gloves with precise movements. "Emma Lawson is more than just an architect. She was your father's protégé. He spent an unusual amount of time mentoring her." The implication in her tone was clear, but I ignored the bait. "Dad always made time for talented people." "Indeed." Diane's smile didn't reach her eyes. "The reading is tomorrow at 10 a.m. I trust you'll be punctual. We have the board meeting afterward, and I'd prefer to conclude all this unpleasantness as efficiently as possible." "What's the rush, Diane? The company isn't going anywhere." "Gordon Tanner's offer has an expiration date," she replied, "and the board is understandably concerned about stability during this transition period." "I'm sure they are," I said evenly. "Fortunately, as executor and majority shareholder, I can provide that stability while we evaluate all options." Diane's composed facade cracked slightly. "Majority shareholder? That's not possible. Robert and I had an agreement. You'll have to take that up with Dad's attorney, I replied. But I wouldn't count on that merger happening on schedule. Before she could respond, Alex approached to tell her that the cars were waiting to take them to the reception at the Reed family home, an event to which I had not been invited. After they departed, I remained at the gravesite, watching as cemetery workers prepared to lower the casket into the ground. Walter stood respectfully at a distance, giving me privacy for these final moments. "I'll do right by you, Dad," I murmured. "And by the company. I promise." The next morning, I met with Emma Lawson at a coffee shop near Walter's office to review the West Side development plans before the reading. She arrived with a laptop and a tube of rolled blueprints, her enthusiasm for the project evident as she spread the materials across our table. Robert's vision was to transform this abandoned industrial area into a mixed-use development that would actually serve the neighborhood, she explained, pointing to detailed renderings. Affordable housing, public green spaces, local retail, community facilities. Not just luxury condos and chain stores. The plans were impressive, ambitious but grounded in practical urban planning principles. This wasn't just another development. It was a legacy project designed to revitalize a struggling neighborhood while still yielding reasonable returns for investors. "The numbers work?" I asked, scanning the financial projections. Emma nodded. "It's not a get-rich-quick scheme, but the 20-year projections are solid. Robert was playing the long game. And Tanner wants to change this dramatically." Her expression darkened. "Strip out the affordable housing, minimize the public spaces, maximize high-end retail and luxury units. Typical developer playbook. Extract maximum profit with minimal community benefit." I studied the plans with growing appreciation for my father's vision. This project encapsulated everything he had stood for: quality construction, community, impact, and sustainable business practices. "Gordon Tanner approached you directly about revisions?" "3 times in the past month," Emma confirmed. He seemed very confident that the project would fall under his control after Robert's death. I checked my watch. "The reading is in 30 minutes. I should get going." "What are you going to do about Tanner?" Emma asked, carefully rolling up the blueprints. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "But I won't let him anywhere near this project." Walter. Grisham's conference room was tense when I arrived. Diane sat at one end of the table, flanked by Vanessa and Alex. On the opposite side sat Grace Martinez and 2 older men I recognized as longtime Reed Construction Board members. Walter took his place at the head of the table, with me to his right. "Thank you all for coming," Walter began formally. "We're here for the reading of Robert Reed's last will and testament. As you know, Robert named his son Nathan as executor of his estate, a role that gives him certain legal authorities regarding the administration of Robert's assets." Diane's mouth tightened, but she remained silent. Walter proceeded to outline the basic provisions of the will: personal items to various family members, charitable donations to organizations Dad had supported throughout his life, and specific bequests to longtime employees, including a generous sum to Grace. Then came the matter of Reed Construction. Regarding his majority ownership of Reed Construction, representing 75% of the company's shares, Walter continued, Robert has directed that these shares be divided as follows: 55% to his son, Nathan Reed, 10% to his wife, Diane Reed, 5% each to his stepchildren, Vanessa and Alexander Hargrove. Vanessa gasped audibly. Alex's face flushed red. "This is outrageous," Diane said, her voice trembling with suppressed anger. "Robert promised me those shares would be divided equally among all family members." "I have no record of such a promise in any legal document," Walter replied calmly. "Robert was quite specific about this distribution in his final will, which was updated and signed 3 weeks before his death, with all proper witnesses and of sound mind." "He was on heavy medication," Vanessa argued. "His judgment was impaired." I have signed statements from his doctors confirming his mental competence at the time of signing, Walter countered. The will stands as written. Alex leaned forward. What about the remaining 25% of the shares? Those were previously distributed among various minority shareholders, primarily longtime employees and executives, Walter explained. Those arrangements remain unchanged. Diane stood abruptly. This is not what we discussed, Walter. You know Robert intended for the company to remain under family control. Our family, not just Nathan. On the contrary, Walter said firmly, Robert was explicit about his wishes. The distribution reflects his desire for the company's future direction, which I assume includes blocking the merger with Tanner Industries, Alex said, looking directly at me. That will be discussed at the board meeting this afternoon, I replied evenly. But yes, I have serious concerns about the proposed terms. Vanessa let out a humorless laugh. Of course you do. You swoop in after years of absence, claim controlling interest in the company, and now you think you understand what's best for its future? I understand what Dad wanted, I said. He made that very clear. You have no idea what he wanted, Vanessa snapped. You weren't here. Enough, Walter intervened. There are additional provisions regarding the West Side Development Project, which Robert owned personally, separate from Reed Construction. Diane's head snapped up. What West Side project? Walter glanced at me before continuing. Robert held the development rights to the former West Side Industrial Park. Those rights transfer in their entirety to Nathan, along with all plans, permits, and associated contractual obligations. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The West Side project was potentially worth even more than Reed Construction itself, and now it belonged solely to me. This is theft, Diane said, her voice deadly quiet. You manipulated a dying man, turned him against his family, and now you've taken everything. I didn't manipulate anyone, I replied. I didn't even know about most of this until after he died. These were Dad's decisions, made while he was watching you and your children negotiate to sell his life's work to his biggest competitor. Alex paled slightly. What are you talking about? The recordings, Alex. Dad knew about your meetings with Gordon Tanner. He knew about the side deals, the promises made behind his back while he was fighting for his life. Vanessa looked uncertainty at her brother. What recordings? Before Alex could respond, Walter intervened. Perhaps this discussion would be better continued at the board meeting. There are other matters in the will to address. The remainder of the reading passed in strained silence. When Walter concluded, Diane and her children left without a word, their body language radiating fury and betrayal. Grace remained behind, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. That went about as expected. They'll contest the will, Walter warned. Let them try, I said. We have the documentation to prove Dad's competence and his knowledge of their actions with Tanner. What will you do now? Grace asked. The board meeting is in 2 hours, and Gordon Tanner will be there, expecting to finalize the merger. I gathered my papers, a plan crystallizing in my mind. First, I need to make a phone call to an old friend at Crawford and Mitchell. The investment firm? Walter asked, eyebrows raised. Yes. Then I need to prepare a presentation for the board. I turned to Grace. Can you get me the latest project reports and client contracts? I need to demonstrate that the company is stronger than they've been led to believe. Grace nodded. I'll have everything ready in an hour. As they left, I stood at the window overlooking downtown Chicago, the skyline dotted with buildings my father had helped construct over his lifetime. Somewhere in that landscape was his legacy, and now, unexpectedly, it was mine to protect or transform. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Heard about the will. Congratulations on the West Side project. When do we continue the work? I smiled. As I typed back, sooner than anyone expects. I'm going to need those revised projections we discussed. The chess game was entering its middle phase. Pieces were being captured, positions revealed. But the most decisive moves were yet to come. Reed Construction's boardroom occupied the top floor of the company headquarters, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of the Chicago skyline. My father had designed the space to impress clients and remind everyone of the company's contributions to the city. Many of the visible buildings bore Reed Construction's mark. I arrived 30 minutes early to prepare, laying out presentation, materials at each seat and connecting my laptop to the projection system. Grace had delivered everything I'd requested: current financial reports, active project statuses, client retention data, and employee satisfaction surveys. The numbers told a story very different from the one Diane and Alex had been presenting. Board members began arriving in small groups, their curious glances and hushed conversations making it clear that news of the will's provisions had spread quickly. Most were longtime executives or project managers who had worked with my father for decades. A few nodded respectfully in my direction, but most maintained a wary distance, uncertain where their allegiances should lie in this family power struggle. At precisely 2 p.m., Gordon Tanner strode into the room with the confidence of someone who already owned the place. He was shorter than I remembered, with a tailored suit that emphasized his athletic build and a perpetual half-smile that never reached his cold blue eyes. Behind him came his legal team and 2 senior executives from Tanner Industries. "Nathan Reed," he said, approaching with an extended hand. "It's been, 6 years?" 7, I corrected, accepting his handshake briefly. "The Riviera Building project." "Ah, yes, when you were still learning the business." His condescension was barely veiled. "I was sorry to hear about your father. Robert was a worthy competitor. Before I could respond, Diane entered with Alex and Vanessa in tow. Her expression froze momentarily when she spotted me at the head of the table, my father's position. "I see you've made yourself comfortable," she remarked icily. "Just preparing for an efficient meeting," I replied. "We have a lot to cover." Walter Grisham arrived last, taking a seat near me with a leather portfolio and recorder. Once everyone was settled, I called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. As you know, my father, Robert Reed, named me executor of his estate, which includes his controlling interest in Reed Construction. Before we address the proposed merger with Tanner Industries, I'd like to provide an accurate picture of the company's current status." Gordon Tanner shifted impatiently. "With all due respect, Nathan, we've already conducted extensive due diligence. The merger documents are prepared and ready for signatures. This meeting is merely a formality." "I'm afraid not, Mr. Tanner," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "As majority shareholder, I have serious concerns about both the necessity and the terms of this merger." Alex leaned forward. "Nathan, we've spent months negotiating this deal. The terms are extremely favorable given the company's financial challenges." "What financial challenges would those be, Alex?" I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, displaying Reed Construction's actual balance sheet and project pipeline. "Because, according to these figures, the company is in a strong position." Murmurs rippled through the board members as they studied the numbers before them. "This doesn't match the reports we've been reviewing," said Patricia Winters, the most senior board member. "We were told cash flow issues threatened project completion and employee payroll." "You were misled," I stated flatly. "Whether deliberately or through incompetence, I can't say." Diane's face flushed. "How dare you—" "The numbers speak for themselves," I interrupted, advancing to the next slide showing project completion rates and client satisfaction scores. Reed Construction has maintained its industry-leading position despite attempts to sabotage it from within. Gordon Tanner's smile had vanished. "These are serious allegations, Nathan. Perhaps we should discuss this privately before proceeding." "I prefer transparency," I replied, "especially since I have documentation of your private meetings with Alex over the past 6 months, meetings my father was unaware of until shortly before his death." Alex paled visibly. That's not— We have the recordings, Walter Grisham interjected quietly, placing a USB drive on the table. And the witness statements. The boardroom fell silent as the implications sank in. I continued my presentation, methodically dismantling the narrative that Reed Construction needed saving through a merger with Tanner Industries. The proposed deal undervalues Reed Construction by approximately 40% based on current market comps, I explained, displaying a comparative analysis. More importantly, it fails to protect the company's employees, many of whom have dedicated decades to building what we have today. Patricia Winters studied the figures with a frown. If these numbers are accurate, why were we presented with such a different picture? I glanced at Diane and Alex. That's an excellent question. Gordon Tanner cleared his throat. Markets change, valuations fluctuate. Our offer was based on the information provided by the acting management during Robert's illness. If that information was inaccurate, perhaps we should postpone our discussions until a proper valuation can be conducted. Or perhaps, I suggested, we should recognize that this merger was never about strengthening Reed Construction, but about eliminating a competitor and acquiring its client relationships and the West Side development rights. Tanner's expression hardened. The West Side project is a central component of our offer. A component you're no longer entitled to, Walter observed. As specified in Robert Reed's will, those development rights belong exclusively to Nathan, separate from Reed Construction assets. Vanessa, who had remained uncharacteristically quiet until now, slammed her hand on the table. This is ridiculous. Dad built this company for our family, not for Nathan to swoop in and take control after abandoning us for years. I never abandoned Dad, I said firmly. We remained close despite the distance. What I did was refuse to watch you and your mother turn his company into your personal ATM while undermining everything he built. That's enough, Diane snapped. We won't sit here and be insulted by someone who was barely part of Robert's life these past years. I pulled out my father's letter from my portfolio. Dad had a different perspective. Would you like me to read his words to the board? Diane's expression flickered with uncertainty. What letter? The one he wrote explaining why he named me executor and majority shareholder instead of you. I held up the envelope with my father's handwriting clearly visible. It's quite detailed about his concerns regarding your financial decisions and priorities. A tense silence fell over the room. Gordon Tanner, sensing the deteriorating situation, stood up. Perhaps we should reconvene when family matters have been resolved, he suggested smoothly. Our offer remains on the table, but clearly there are internal issues to address first. I remained seated. Actually, Mr. Tanner, I have a counter-proposal. You might find interesting. This caught everyone by surprise, including Walter Grisham, who gave me a questioning look. Reed Construction is not for sale, I continued, but we are interested in acquiring Tanner Industries' residential division. Gordon's face registered shock before he barked out a laugh. You can't be serious. Perfectly serious. I nodded to Grace, who distributed a new set of documents to everyone at the table. Crawford and Mitchell Investment Group has agreed to back our offer at very favorable terms. Your residential division has been underperforming for 3 years, dragging down your commercial profits. We're prepared to take it off your hands at market value. Tanner snatched up the document, his face darkening as he scanned the figures. This is absurd. You don't have the capital. We do now, I interrupted. The West Side development has attracted significant investor interest. As the sole owner of those rights, I've secured funding commitments that make this acquisition entirely feasible. Board members were flipping through the proposal with growing interest. Patricia Winters looked up with an appraising expression. This is actually quite sound, she remarked. Tanner's residential division would complement our existing operations. Without overlapping, the synergies are clear. You've been planning this, Diane accused, staring at me with dawning comprehension. All along, while pretending to be the grieving son. I am grieving, I countered. But Dad taught me that business continues even through personal loss. He also taught me to recognize opportunity when it appears. Gordon Tanner had regained his composure, though a muscle twitches in his jaw. This offer is inadequate and opportunistic. We're not interested. That's unfortunate, I said mildly. Especially since we've already spoken with your 3 largest residential clients about their contracts. They've expressed concerns about service quality and cost overruns under your management. It was a calculated bluff, but Tanner's expression confirmed I'd hit a nerve. His residential division had been struggling precisely because of client dissatisfaction. You're playing a dangerous game, Nathan, he warned. Your father understood the boundaries of acceptable competition. My father understood that loyalty to employees and commitment to quality work were non-negotiable, I replied. Values your company has consistently sacrificed for short-term profits. The meeting evolved from there. Gordon Tanner and his team left after making thinly veiled threats about legal consequences. Diane, Alex, and Vanessa departed in frosty silence, refusing to acknowledge the board's clear shift towards supporting my leadership. After the boardroom cleared, only Patricia Winters remained behind, studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. That was either brilliantly strategic or incredibly reckless, she finally said. Possibly both. I was taught to play chess, not checkers, I replied. She smiled slightly. Your father used that same line. He would have enjoyed watching you today. Her expression turned serious. But Gordon Tanner is a vindictive man, and your stepfamily won't take this lying down. You've made powerful enemies. I can handle Gordon Tanner, I said with more confidence than I felt. As for Diane and her children, that's more complicated. Patricia gathered her papers. Family always is. But I think you should know that many of us on the board suspected things weren't right during Robert's illness. Alex was making decisions. That seemed questionable. We just didn't have enough proof to challenge him directly. And now? Now we have a Reed back at the helm. She stood to leave. Don't make us regret supporting you, Nathan. After she left, I remained in the empty boardroom, staring out at the Chicago skyline as the afternoon light cast long shadows across the buildings. I had won this round decisively, but the game was far from over. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Heard about what happened at the board meeting. Bold move. When do we talk about next steps for the West Side? Before I could respond, the door opened and Alex entered alone, his expression unreadable. That was quite a performance, he said, closing the door behind him. I remained standing, wary of his intentions. It wasn't a performance, it was the truth. Maybe. He approached slowly, hands in his pockets. But you didn't tell the whole truth, did you? About why you really left Chicago 6 years ago. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. That has nothing to do with the current situation. Doesn't it? Alex leaned against the conference table. Dad protected you then, covered up your mistake. Does the board know about the Riviera building? Design flaw that nearly collapsed the foundation? The one Dad took the blame for? I kept my expression neutral despite the unexpected attack. That was addressed and corrected before construction even began. No one was in danger. But it would have destroyed your architectural career if it had become public, Alex pressed. Your precious New York firm wouldn't have touched you? Dad saved you? Took the hit to his own reputation? And how did you repay him? By running away when things got tough at home. Is there a point to this conversation, Alex? Or did you just come to dredge up ancient history? He straightened. The point is, you're not the only one with leverage, Nathan. We all have secrets. Push this too far and everything comes out, including the real reason you abandoned the family business. The threat was clear, but I refused to be intimidated. Dad forgave that mistake because I owed it to him directly. I learned from it and became better because of it. Can you say the same about your betrayal? Negotiating with Tanner behind Dad's back while he was fighting for his life? Alex flinched slightly. I was trying to secure our future. The company was struggling. The company was fine, I interrupted. You created a crisis to justify a sale that would benefit you personally. It wasn't like that. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his voice. Gordon promised that everyone would keep their jobs, that the Reed name would continue. And you believed him? Or did you just want to believe him because it came with a VP title and a 7-figure signing bonus? Alex paled. How did you— Dad? Knew everything, Alex. Every meeting, every backdoor deal. He just couldn't understand why his own stepson would betray him so completely. The fight seemed to drain out of Alex as he sank into a chair. It started small, just conversations, information sharing. Then Gordon offered the VP position, and it seemed like a solution to everything. The company would survive. I'd advance. My career, everyone would win. Except Dad. Except the employees whose jobs would eventually be eliminated. Except the Reed legacy that would be dismantled for parts. Alex ran a hand through his hair, suddenly looking exhausted. What are you going to do? Turn over the recordings to the board? Press charges? I studied him for a moment, seeing not the antagonist of recent days, but the young man my father had tried to mentor despite their complicated relationship. Dad had seen potential in Alex once. Perhaps there was still something worth salvaging. That depends on you, I said finally. I don't want a prolonged family war, Alex. It wouldn't honor Dad's memory, and it would damage the company we're both supposedly trying to protect. Hope flickered in his eyes. What are you suggesting? A truce. You come clean with the board? About what really happened with Tanner? What promises were made? You work to repair the relationships with clients and employees that were damaged during Dad's illness. And in return, you keep your position with the company in a restructured role. And Vanessa and Diane? That's more complicated, I admitted, but I'm willing to negotiate with them too, if they're reasonable. Alex was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Why would you offer this after everything that's happened? Because Dad believed in second chances, I said simply. He gave me one when I needed it most. Maybe it's time I paid that forward. I'll need to think about it, he said finally, standing to leave. Don't think too long, I warned. This offer has an expiration date. After he left, I turned back to the window, watching as the sun began to set over Chicago. The day had been a series of confrontations and revelations, each shifting the chessboard in unexpected ways. I had entered the game prepared for battle, only to find myself considering the possibility of reconciliation, at least with Alex. My phone rang, Walter Grisham calling with news that would once again change everything. Nathan? He said, his voice grave. There's been a development. I've just received notice that Diane has filed an emergency petition challenging the will and your authority as executor. She's alleging undue influence and diminished capacity. On what grounds? I asked, though I could guess the answer. She claims to have evidence that Robert was not of sound mind when he made the changes. And she's demanding an immediate injunction to halt any business decisions until the matter is resolved. Evidence like what? That's the concerning part, Walter said. According to her filing, she has medical records showing your father was on medication that affected his cognitive abilities, plus testimony from his primary physician that he was experiencing periods of confusion. I processed this information, trying to determine if it was a genuine threat or simply a desperate maneuver. Is there any merit to these claims? It's difficult to say without seeing the evidence. The judge assigned to the case is Douglas Harmon. He tends to be cautious in these matters. He's scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. Can she actually block me from acting as executor? Temporarily, possibly. If the judge grants the injunction, all estate matters would be frozen pending further proceedings. That includes your authority over Reed Construction and the West Side project. The implications were clear. Diane was attempting to regain control, by legal means after failing in the boardroom. If she succeeded, Even temporarily, she could potentially push through the Tanner merger before I could stop it. I'll need everything we have documenting Dad's competence during his final weeks, I said. Medical opinions, witness statements, video recordings if we have them. I've already started gathering the materials, Walter assured me. But Nathan, you should prepare yourself. These cases can get ugly very quickly. Family disputes over wills often devolve into character assassination and painful revelations. I thought of Alex's veiled threat about my past mistake, wondering if it was coordinated with Diane's legal maneuver. I understand. Do what you need to do, Walter. I won't. Let them undo Dad's wishes or destroy what he built. After hanging up, I texted Emma. New complications. Need to postpone our West Side discussion. Legal challenge to the will. Her response was immediate. Anything I can do to help? I considered for a moment before replying. Actually, yes. Dad mentioned you were with him when he made some key decisions about the company's future. Your testimony might be valuable. Just tell me when and where, she wrote back. Robert believed in you. So do I. Her confidence was reassuring, but as I left the boardroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow's legal battle would be even more challenging than today's boardroom confrontation. Diane had raised the stakes dramatically, and now all of my father's careful plans and my newfound purpose in honoring them hung in the balance. The Cook County Courthouse stood as a neoclassical monument to order and justice in downtown Chicago, its limestone facade gleaming in the morning light. I arrived an hour before the scheduled hearing, meeting Walter Grisham on the steps outside. I've been reviewing Diane's filings all night, he said as we climbed the stairs. She's submitted affidavits from Robert's oncologist and home health nurse suggesting his medication regimen could have impaired his judgment. Could have or did? I asked, holding the heavy door for him. That's the issue. The statements are carefully worded to imply impairment without directly stating it was present when he revised his will. Walter's expression was grim, but determined. Unfortunately, Judge Harmon tends to err on the side of caution in these matters. We checked in with security and made our way to the assigned courtroom. Despite the early hour, Diane had already arrived with her legal team, 2 sharp-looking attorneys from Preston and Williams, one of Chicago's most expensive firms. Vanessa sat beside her, whispering intently. Alex was notably absent. Interesting, Walter murmured. Alex isn't here. Maybe your conversation yesterday had an impact. Before I could respond, Emma Lawson appeared, looking professional in a tailored navy suit. I came as soon as I could, she said. I brought the video recordings from our final project meetings with Robert. They show him discussing complex financial projections just days before he revised his will. Walter accepted the flash drive gratefully. This could be extremely helpful. Judge Harmon responds well to concrete evidence rather than hearsay. As we settled into our seats, I noticed Grace Martinez entering the courtroom. She nodded in my direction before taking a seat in the back row. Another potential ally in the upcoming battle. At precisely 9 a.m., the bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Douglas Harmon entered. He was older than I expected, with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He reviewed the filings before him with methodical care before addressing the room. This is a hearing on the matter of Reed ver. Reed. An emergency. Petition to suspend executorship and freeze estate assets pending review of testamentary capacity, he stated formally. Let's begin with statements from the petitioner. Diane's lead attorney, a polished woman in her 50s, approached the bench. Your Honor, this is a straightforward matter of protecting an estate from irreparable harm. Robert Reed made significant changes to his will and estate planning during his final illness, while under the influence of powerful medications that affected his cognitive function. These changes dramatically altered his long-established inheritance plans in favor of his estranged son, Nathan Reed. I bristled at the characterization, but kept my face neutral as she continued. We have submitted medical documentation confirming Mr. Reed's medication regimen and expert testimony regarding potential cognitive impacts. We're simply asking the court to pause any major estate decisions until a full evaluation of Robert Reed's testamentary capacity can be completed. Without this injunction, assets may be irretrievably compromised. Judge Harmon nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Grisham, your response? Walter rose with the calm confidence of decades in courtrooms. Your Honor, the petitioner's claims rest on speculation and selective interpretation. Robert Reed was unquestionably ill, but his mental faculties remained sharp until his final days. The changes to his will were not impulsive, but represented careful consideration of troubling developments within his company. He approached the bench with a folder. We have submitted counter affidavits from Mr. Reed's primary physician affirming his mental competence, along with witness statements from professional colleagues who met with him regularly until the end. Most compelling are video recordings of business meetings showing Mr. Reed engaged in complex decision-making just days before the will revision. The judge accepted the materials, scanning them with practiced efficiency. Ms. Preston, did you have an opportunity to review these counter-affidavits before today? Diane's attorney looked momentarily flustered. No, Your Honor. They were not shared with us in advance. Just as the petitioner's medical claims weren't shared with us until filing, Walter countered smoothly. We've been gathering evidence in response to this emergency petition, which came without warning. Judge Harmon removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. I'll review these materials carefully. In the meantime, does the petitioner have specific concerns about immediate actions the executor might take that would cause irreparable harm? Diane leaned forward, whispering urgently to her attorney, who nodded before addressing the court. Yes, Your Honor. We have reason to believe that Nathan Reed intends to sabotage a pending merger agreement with Tanner Industries that could save Reed Construction from financial difficulties. This merger has been in negotiation for months and represents the best opportunity to preserve the company and its employees' futures. I couldn't help the slight shake of my head at this blatant misrepresentation. Mr. Reed, the judge said, turning his attention to me directly. Is there truth to this assertion about a merger? Walter began to respond, but I placed a hand on his arm and stood. If I may address this directly, Your Honor? The judge nodded permission. There were indeed discussions about a potential merger with Tanner Industries, I acknowledged. However, those negotiations were conducted primarily by my stepbrother, Alexander Hargrove, often without my father's knowledge or consent during his illness. Yesterday, I presented the Reed Construction Board with evidence that the company is financially sound and that the proposed merger significantly undervalues its assets. I paused to ensure the judge was following. The board voted unanimously to reject the Tanner offer and pursue alternative strategies. This wasn't my unilateral decision as executor, but a formal board action based on financial realities. Judge Harmon's interest was clearly piqued. The entire board voted against this merger? Yes, Your Honor, including several members who have served alongside my father for decades. Diane's attorney jumped in. Your Honor, this only demonstrates the urgency of our petition. The executor has already begun dismantling arrangements that were months in development. Walter rose again. With respect, Your Honor, those arrangements were never finalized or approved by Robert Reed. They were negotiations conducted by individuals who stood to benefit personally from the merger, as our evidence will show. The judge's expression hardened slightly. That's a serious allegation, Mr. Grisham. One we're prepared to substantiate fully in these proceedings, Walter replied confidently. Judge Harmon shuffled through the papers before him. I'm inclined to review all evidence thoroughly before making a determination on this petition. In the meantime, the courtroom doors opened, interrupting the judge mid-sentence. Alex entered, looking uncomfortable in the sudden silence. Behind him came Patricia Winters and two other Reed Construction Board members. Apologies for the interruption, Your Honor, Alex said, approaching the front. I'm Alexander Hargrove, Robert Reed's stepson. I believe my testimony is relevant to these proceedings. Diane turned in her seat, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. Alex, what are you doing? She hissed. Judge Harmon frowned at the disruption. Mr. Hargrove, this court doesn't appreciate theatrical entrances. If you wish to testify, there are proper procedures. I understand, Your Honor, Alex replied. But given the emergency nature of this petition and the claims being made about Reed Construction's finances and the Tanner merger, I felt compelled to speak. The judge considered this for a moment. Very well. Since you're already here, you may make a brief statement. Be advised that you're under oath in this courtroom. Alex nodded and took a deep breath. The claims being made about Reed Construction's financial distress are false. I should know. I helped fabricate them. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Diane's face was drained of color. During my father's illness, Alex continued, I worked with Gordon Tanner to create a narrative that the company was struggling. We manipulated project reports, delayed certain payments to create cash flow concerns, and presented selective information to the board. The goal was to make the Tanner merger seem like the only viable option. Judge Harmon's expression was now severe. Mr. Hargrove, are you admitting to fraudulent business practices from the stand? Alex paled slightly but nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I'm prepared to accept the consequences of my actions. But I can't allow this court proceeding to continue under false pretenses. My stepmother's petition is based on a situation that doesn't exist. The company isn't in financial trouble, and the merger was never in the best interest of Reed Construction. The courtroom had fallen completely silent. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing. Alex publicly confessing to protect my position as executor. It was the last thing I had expected when I'd offered him that olive branch yesterday. Furthermore, Alex added, my father was completely lucid when he changed his will. I visited him that day. He explained his decision to name Nathan as executor, citing concerns about how the company was being managed in his absence. He was sad but resolute, and his mind was crystal clear. Diane's attorney scrambled to regain control. Your Honor, Mr. Hargrove is clearly under duress or influence. These statements contradict his previous positions entirely. No, Alex said firmly. I'm finally telling the truth after months of deception. I have documentation to support everything I've said, which I've provided to the Reed Construction board members who accompanied me today. Patricia Winters stood from her seat in the gallery. Your Honor, as the senior member of the Reed Construction Board, I can confirm that we've reviewed Mr. Hargrove's documentation and found it consistent with the financial irregularities we began investigating after yesterday's board meeting. Judge Harmon removed his glasses, his expression stern as he addressed Diane's legal team. Counselor, did you verify the financial claims in your petition before filing this emergency action? The attorney looked deeply uncomfortable. We relied on our client's representations, Your Honor. I see. The judge turned to Diane directly. Mrs. Reed, were you aware of the information your son has just shared with this court? Diane's composure cracked slightly. I was aware that Alex was working closely with Gordon Tanner. The specific details of their arrangement were not my concern. But you were aware the company wasn't actually in financial distress when you filed this petition? The judge pressed. The company has had challenges. That's not what I asked, Mrs. Reed. Diane fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Judge Harmon sat back in his chair, surveying the courtroom with a practiced eye. After a moment of consideration, he delivered his ruling. Based on the evidence and testimony presented, I am denying the petition for emergency injunction. The executor, Nathan Reed, will continue in his capacity as named in Robert Reed's will. Furthermore, he added, his tone hardening, I am referring this matter to the district attorney's office for review of potential perjury and attempted fraud upon the court. He banged his gavel once. This hearing is adjourned. Counselors, remain for a moment to discuss next steps. As the courtroom began to clear, I approached Alex, still processing his unexpected intervention. Why? I asked simply. He met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time in years. Because Dad deserved better, from all of us. He glanced toward Diane, who was engaged in intense conversation with her attorneys. I spent the night reviewing everything. The real numbers, the recordings of my meetings with Tanner, Dad's final messages. I couldn't continue the lie, not even for her. You realize you've potentially opened yourself to legal consequences? I said quietly. Alex nodded. I know, but it was time to own my mistakes, like you said. Dad gave you a second chance when you needed it. Maybe now I need one too. Before I could respond, Vanessa approached, her expression a mixture of fury and betrayal. How could you? She demanded of Alex. After everything we've worked for? That's the problem, Vanessa, he replied. We weren't working for anything but ourselves. We lost sight of what Dad built and what he wanted to preserve. She turned on me. This is your fault. You turned him against us. Alex made his own decision, I said calmly. Just like you and Diane made yours when you tried to lock me out of Dad's funeral and challenged the will with false claims. Vanessa's eyes filled with angry tears. You have no idea what we've been through these past months. While you were building your perfect life in New York, we were watching Dad die by inches. The raw pain in her voice gave me pause. Despite everything, her grief was real as mine, just expressed differently. You're right, I acknowledged softly. I wasn't there for his illness, and that's something I'll always regret. But I'm here now, trying to honor what he wanted for the company and for all of us. By taking everything? She demanded. No, by protecting everything. There's a difference. I glanced at Alex, who was watching our exchange with a troubled expression. The company has always been bigger than any one of us. Dad understood that. It's about the legacy, the employees, the projects that improve the city. Walter approached, ending our conversation. The judge wants to speak with you privately, Nathan. And Alex, the DA's office will be contacting you about a formal statement. As they walked away, I turned back to Vanessa. I know you don't believe this, but I never wanted a family war. Even now, I'm willing to find a path forward that respects Dad's wishes while acknowledging your place in his life. She studied me. For a long moment, her expression unreadable. It's too late for that, she finally said. Diane won't stop fighting, and She hesitated. I don't know what to believe anymore. After the courthouse proceedings, Walter and I returned to his office to review next steps. The immediate threat had been neutralized, but Diane could still contest the will through normal probate procedures, a process that might drag on for months or even years. Alex's testimony was unexpected but decisive, Walter observed, pouring coffee for both of us. Judge Harmon doesn't take kindly to being misled, especially in emergency petitions. What happens to Alex now? I asked. That depends on the DA's office, but given his voluntary disclosure and cooperation, they'll likely offer a settlement arrangement. The board will have its own decisions to make regarding his future with the company. I nodded, thinking about the complex tangle of business and family that I'd inherited. And Diane? Walter's expression turned grimmer. She won't give up easily. The court may have rejected her emergency petition, but she could still file a standard will contest. It would take longer, but could tie up certain assets during the proceedings. Which would delay the West Side development, I realized. Precisely. And I suspect that's her next move. She doesn't necessarily expect to win, but she can create enough obstacles to force concessions. My phone buzzed with a message from Emma. Heard about the court victory? Still want to meet about West Side? Plans? I need to reevaluate everything, I said, scrolling through my calendar. Set up a meeting with the board for tomorrow morning. Also, I'd like to review all active projects and client relationships. Walter raised an eyebrow. Planning to stay in Chicago longer than you anticipated? It was a fair question. I'd flown in for a funeral, expecting to stay 3 days at most. Now I was a week in with no return ticket booked. I need to stabilize things before I can step back, I said. Make sure Dad's legacy is secure. And your job in New York? I hesitated. My architecture firm had been understanding about the bereavement leave, but my extended absence was straining their patience. The landmark restoration project I'd been leading needed decisions that only I could make. I'm hoping to find a balance, I said finally. Something that honors Dad's wishes without requiring me to abandon the career I've built. Walter nodded thoughtfully. Robert always believed you had the vision to see possibilities others missed. Perhaps there's a solution that isn't immediately obvious. As we wrapped up our meeting, Grace Martinez called with troubling news. Gordon Tanner just announced a new development project 3 blocks from your West Side property, she reported. He's claiming it will revitalize the entire area. The press is eating it up. How is that possible? I asked. He doesn't have rights to any property in that neighborhood. He just acquired them from Commonwealth Partners this morning. The timing is suspicious, don't you think? Right after losing his shot at Reed Construction. I understood immediately. He's trying to devalue the West Side project by creating competition. Classic Tanner move. There's more, Grace continued. He's hired away 2 of your father's project managers who were involved in the early West Side planning. They know the development strategy intimately. The implications were serious. Tanner was attempting to undercut the West Side project's potential by launching a competing development with inside knowledge of our plans. It was a direct attack on the most valuable asset I'd inherited. Get me everything we have on Tanner's new property, I instructed. Tax records, zoning details, environmental reports, and set up a meeting with Emma Lawson immediately. After hanging up, I stood at Walter's office window, looking out at the city my father had helped build. The challenges were mounting. Diane's continued legal resistance, Tanner's competitive maneuver, my own career hanging in the balance in New York. Each problem alone was significant. Together, they threatened to overwhelm me. But beneath the stress and uncertainty, I felt something unexpected. A sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. The architecture work in New York had been fulfilling professionally, but this was different. This was about family legacy, about promises kept, about honoring a man who had always believed in me even when I doubted myself. My phone rang again, my boss from New York, calling for the 3rd time that day. I took a deep breath and answered, knowing the conversation ahead would force me to make choices I'd been avoiding. The chess game was entering its most critical phase, with pieces being sacrificed and positions consolidated. The next moves would determine not just the fate of Reed Construction and the West Side project. 3 months after the courthouse confrontation, I stood at the edge of the West Side property, watching as construction crews prepared the ground for the first phase of development. The autumn air carried the scent of freshly turned earth and possibility. It's really happening, Emma said, joining me with rolled blueprints under her arm. Robert would be proud. I nodded, surveying the massive site that would eventually transform into a mixed-use development serving both the neighborhood's needs and the company's future. We've made some good revisions to his original vision. Better than good? She corrected, unrolling the latest plans. The community center and affordable housing components are exactly what this area needs. And the financial projections are stronger than our initial estimates. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of negotiations, planning meetings, and difficult decisions. After my confrontation with Diane in court, I had expected a prolonged legal battle. Instead, something unexpected had happened. A family reckoning that changed everything. Mr. Reed, called the site foreman, approaching with a clipboard. The environmental team needs your sign-off on the remediation plan. I reviewed the documents, noting the careful attention to sustainable practices that had become Reed Construction's new hallmark. "Looks good, Jim. Let's make sure we're exceeding code requirements, not just meeting them." "Yes, sir. That's the Reed way," he replied with a knowing smile. As Emma and I walked back toward the temporary offices at the edge of the site, my phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Board meeting materials prepared. Alex finished the quarterly presentation. Looks solid." I smiled slightly at the message. Alex's transformation had been perhaps the most surprising development of all. After his courtroom confession, he had faced the consequences of his actions: legal settlement with the district attorney, probation within the company, and the difficult task of rebuilding trust with colleagues. But he had approached it all with a humility and determination that reminded me, unexpectedly, of my father. "You're meeting with Vanessa today?" Emma asked as we reached her car. "Yes, at the downtown office. She wants to discuss the Foundation's first grant proposals." Emma nodded approvingly. The Robert Reed Foundation was a brilliant solution. It gives her purpose while honoring your father's philanthropic interests. The foundation had been my olive branch to Vanessa, a way to channel her energy and administrative talents into something meaningful, while keeping her connected to our father's legacy. Initially skeptical, she had gradually embraced the role, showing an unexpected aptitude for identifying worthy community projects. "It's working better than I expected," I admitted. "She's good at it." "And Diane?" Emma asked carefully. I sighed, the one cloud in an otherwise clearing sky. Still keeping her distance. The settlement agreement is holding, but reconciliation seems unlikely. After the failed court challenge, Walter and I had negotiated a compromise with Diane, a substantial cash settlement and lifetime income from a trust, in exchange for relinquishing all claims to Reed Construction and the West Side development. She had accepted the terms with cold practicality, then retreated to her Florida vacation home, communication limited to occasional formal emails about financial matters. "Some wounds take longer to heal," Emma observed. "If they ever do." We reached the main office building, where the Reed Construction logo had been recently updated, still recognizably my father's design, but with subtle modernization that symbolized the company's evolution. "I'll see you at the community presentation." "Tomorrow?" I confirmed as we parted ways. Emma nodded. 3 p.m. at the neighborhood center. The local council members will all be there. Inside, the office buzzed with activity. The company had expanded rapidly in recent months, hiring new talent while promoting deserving employees from within. The culture had shifted too, more collaborative, more innovative, yet still grounded in the quality and integrity that had been my father's hallmarks. Patricia Winters intercepted me on my way to my office. "Nathan, good timing. The Crawford and Mitchell team just sent over the financing package for Phase 2. The terms are even better than we anticipated." "The benefits of exceeding projections on Phase 1, I replied, accepting the folder. "Is Marcus joining us for the board meeting tomorrow?" "Yes, and he's bringing their sustainability director. They're quite impressed with the environmental components we've incorporated." I nodded, pleased that our investment partners were embracing the long-term vision rather than pushing for quick returns. Have the community impact assessment ready to present. That's what sets this development apart. In my office, not my father's, old space, but a new one I'd designed with large windows and collaborative areas, Alex was waiting with quarterly reports. "Revenue up 18%, he said without preamble, his earlier arrogance replaced by efficient professionalism. "The Sullivan Tower project came in under budget and ahead of schedule. Clients are noticing the difference." I reviewed the numbers with satisfaction. "The new project management system is working." "It is," Alex agreed, "though I still think we could streamline the approval process for change orders." "Work up a proposal," I suggested. "We'll review it next week." There was an ease between us. Now, that would have seemed impossible months ago. Not friendship exactly, but a working relationship built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Alex had found his place within the company, not the heir apparent he'd once imagined himself to be, but a valuable contributor with specific talents that complemented rather than competed with mine. "How's New York?" he asked, gathering his materials. "Cold," I replied with a small smile. "But the restoration project is proceeding well. The client's thrilled with the historical preservation elements." My solution to the career dilemma had been unexpected but effective. Splitting my time between Chicago and New York, maintaining my architectural practice while overseeing Reed Construction's transformation. Technology made the arrangement workable, and the dual perspective had proven valuable for both endeavors. "Vanessa's waiting in the conference room," Alex mentioned as he headed for the door. "She seems excited about something." "That's either very good or very concerning," I joked. "With Vanessa, it could go either way," he replied with a wry smile that reminded me of our father. The conference room had been redesigned with sustainability in mind. Reclaimed wood table, energy-efficient lighting, living plant wall. Vanessa sat surrounded by presentation materials, her earlier hostility replaced by focused intensity. "Finally," she said as I entered. "I've been waiting to show you these proposals. Sorry to keep you waiting. The West Side site visit ran long." She waved away the apology, already launching into her presentation. "I've identified 3 initial grant recipients that perfectly align with Dad's values. First, the West Loop Community Training Center. They provide construction and trade skills to underprivileged youth. Second, a scholarship program for architecture students focusing on sustainable design. And third, restoration funding for the historic buildings in Bronzeville." I reviewed the carefully prepared materials, impressed by her thoroughness and vision. "These are excellent choices, Vanessa. Dad would have loved all 3. A flash of emotion crossed her face, pleasure at the approval mixed with lingering grief. "I wanted to get it right, for him." "You did." I sat across from her, studying the sister who had once tried to bar me from our father's funeral. "The foundation board will approve these unanimously." She nodded, then hesitated before asking, "Have you heard from Mom?" I shook my head. "Not directly. Walter handles most of the communication regarding the trust distributions." Vanessa sighed. "She's still angry. With all of us, I think. She won't return my calls either." "Give her time," I suggested, though I wasn't convinced time would heal this particular rift. Diane had built her identity around being Robert Reed's wife and the presumptive inheritor of his company. Losing both roles had left her adrift and resentful. "Speaking of time," Vanessa said, changing the subject. "How much longer are you staying? In Chicago on this trip?" "Another week, then back to New York for the Barrett Building unveiling." "Why?" She straightened a stack of papers, avoiding my gaze. "I was thinking, maybe I could visit sometime. See your life there. Meet your friends, if that wouldn't be weird." The tentative olive branch caught me by surprise. Of all the relationships damaged by the funeral exclusion and subsequent events, Vanessa's had seemed the least likely to mend. "I'd like that," I said sincerely. "My apartment has a guest room. It's small, but the view of Central Park makes up for it." A genuine smile brightened her face. "I'd like to understand that part of you better, the part Dad always admired so much." The moment of connection was interrupted by my assistant announcing an urgent call. Gordon Tanner, requesting to speak. "With me immediately." "Take it here," I told her. "Put it on speaker." Vanessa raised an eyebrow but remained seated as Tanner's voice filled the room. "Nathan?" he began without preamble. "I think it's time we discussed a truce." I exchanged a glance with Vanessa. "I'm listening, Gordon." "Your West Side development is proceeding impressively," he continued. "Meanwhile, my project 3 blocks over has hit unexpected complications." "Environmental issues?" I suggested, knowing the property's industrial history. A pause. "Among other things. The point is, Competing developments make little sense when we could combine resources. I leaned back in my chair, considering the unexpected overture. You tried to undercut my project, poached my employees, and now you want to partner? Business is business, Tanner replied smoothly. Yesterday's adversary is tomorrow's ally. The numbers make sense, Nathan. Together, we could transform the entire district. On whose terms? I asked, skeptical of his sudden cooperative spirit. Equal partnership, joint venture. Your vision, my resources. Another pause. Your father and I discussed similar arrangements over the years. We were more alike than he cared to admit. Vanessa caught my eye, shaking her head slightly. I appreciate the offer, Gordon, I said carefully. But Reed Construction is proceeding with our development as planned. If you're facing challenges with your property, I'd be open to discussing an acquisition at fair market value, naturally. Tanner's laugh held little humor. Always your father's son. Fine, have your team send terms. But remember, Nathan, Chicago isn't big enough for perpetual enemies. One day, you'll need allies. After he disconnected, Vanessa let out a low whistle. That was unexpected. Not entirely, I replied. We've been hearing rumors about contamination issues on his site. The remediation costs would be substantial. So you'll buy him out? I shook my head. Not directly. But I might have Crawford and Mitchell make an offer through a subsidiary. The property would be valuable as a second phase of our development, properly remediated. Vanessa studied me with new appreciation. Chess, not checkers. Something like that, I agreed with a smile. Later that evening, I visited my father's apartment downtown, the secret space that had become my Chicago residence. I had preserved much of his presence while adding my own touches. The chess set remained on the dining table, the game he'd left unfinished now completed through moves I imagined he would have made. My phone rang as I was reviewing architectural plans for the West Side Community Center. It was Emma. The neighborhood. Council just voted unanimously to support our zoning variance request, she reported excitedly. We have full approval for the mixed-use components. That's fantastic news, I said, genuinely pleased. Community support had been crucial to our vision of development that served existing residents rather than displacing them. It wouldn't have happened without your presentation last week, Emma continued. The way you connected your father's vision to the neighborhood's needs, it really resonated with them. Dad always said buildings should serve people, not the other way around. Speaking of your father, Emma said, her tone shifting slightly, I found something while organizing the project archives. A letter he wrote to you about the West Side development. It was with the original concept sketches, dated about a week before he died. My breath caught. A letter? What does it say? I didn't read it, she replied. It's sealed and addressed to you. I can bring it tomorrow. Please do, I said, curiosity piqued. After we disconnected, I moved to the apartment window, gazing out, at the Chicago skyline illuminated against the night sky. So many of those buildings bore my father's influence, solid, functional, built to last. And now new structures were rising that would reflect both his legacy and my own vision. The following afternoon, Emma delivered the letter, a simple envelope, with Nathan written in my father's distinctive handwriting. I waited until evening to open it, sitting in his favorite chair with a glass of his preferred whiskey. Inside was a single page, the handwriting less steady than I remembered, but still unmistakably his. Dear Nathan, it began. If you're reading this, then my plans have worked, at least partially. You've returned to Chicago and taken control of the West Side project. I hope you've also secured Reed Construction, though that was always the riskier gambit. I smiled at his characteristic strategic thinking, even in illness. The West Side project is more than just another development. It's the culmination of everything I've learned about building, not just structures, but communities. What we construct, Here will outlast both of us, shaping lives for generations. It needs your architectural eye, your understanding of how spaces influence human experience. His words resonated with conversations we'd had years ago, debates about form versus function, that had helped shape my own architectural philosophy. I made mistakes with our family, Nathan, allowed rifts to form and deepen when I should have built bridges. Perhaps in trying to create a legacy in steel and concrete, I neglected the more important one of flesh and blood. Don't make the same error. Whatever has happened with Diane and her children, remember that family, however complicated, matters. I took a sip of whiskey, thinking of the tentative reconciliation with Alex and Vanessa, the still broken relationship with Diane. You left Chicago to build your own path, and I've always been proud of that independence. But I hope in coming back, even temporarily, you'll find what I always knew, that your roots here run deeper than you realized. The city needs builders, with vision and integrity. Whether that's through Reed Construction or your own ventures is for you to decide. The letter concluded simply, "Whatever path you choose, know that you've always been my greatest source of pride. Love, Dad." I carefully folded the letter and returned it to its envelope, emotion tightening my throat. Even now, months after his death, my father was still guiding me, still pushing me to consider possibilities I might otherwise overlook. The next morning, the board meeting proceeded smoothly, with unanimous approval for the next phase of the West Side development. Patricia Winters pulled me aside afterward. "I've been meaning to tell you," she said quietly. "Your father and I had lunch a week before he was hospitalized for the last time. He told me he was changing his will, naming you executor and majority shareholder. What did you think of that decision?" I asked, curious about her perspective as his longtime colleague. "I told him it was either brilliant or foolhardy," she replied with a small smile. He laughed and said, "Sometimes they're the same thing, Patricia." That sounds like Dad. He knew what he was doing, Nathan. He saw in you the ability to honor the past while building something new. That's rare. As the boardroom emptied, Alex approached with updates on the counteroffer to Gordon Tanner's property. "Crawford and Mitchell's subsidiary made the offer this morning," he reported. "Below Tanner's asking price, but fair given the environmental issues." How did he respond? Counteroffered, but not aggressively. He knows he's in a weak position. "I think we'll have a deal by week's weekend." I nodded approval. "Good work, Alex." He hesitated before continuing. "There's something else. Vanessa mentioned you two talked about her visiting New York." "Yes, she seemed interested in seeing my life there." "She was serious about that," Alex said. "It's important to her. To both of us, actually. Finding a way forward as a family despite everything." I studied him, seeing sincerity where I would once have suspected manipulation. "I want that too," I admitted. "It's what Dad would have wanted." "And Diane?" he asked cautiously. I sighed. "That's more complicated. The hurt runs deeper there." "She's struggling," Alex said. "More than she lets on. The settlement gave her financial security, but she built her identity around being Robert Reed's wife and the future of his company." "I understand that," I acknowledged, "but some bridges may take longer to rebuild, if they can be rebuilt at all." "Just don't close the door completely," he suggested. For all her faults, she did love Dad in her way. Later that day, I visited my father's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple but elegant, with his name and dates carved in classic typography. I had added a single line beneath. "He built more than buildings." I placed a small smooth stone on top of the headstone, a habit my mother had taught me from her Jewish heritage, a token of remembrance and presence. "It's been quite a 3 months, Dad," I said quietly. "Not exactly what I expected when I flew in for your funeral." I smiled slightly at the understatement. The company's strong. The West Side development is underway. And the family, well, we're working on it. The autumn breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree overhead, creating patterns of light and shadow across the grave. I found a way to honor your legacy while building my own, I continued. Split time between Chicago and New York. Not the solution. I would have predicted, but it works, for now, at least. I touched the cool granite of the headstone, thinking of all he had built and all that remained to be built. You set up quite a chess game, old man. Pieces in motion long before I even knew we were playing. I smiled at the thought. But I think we're reaching a good endgame. Not the one either of us might have envisioned, but meaningful nonetheless. As I turned to leave, I noticed a small bouquet of fresh flowers I hadn't seen before. Attached was a card in handwriting I recognized. Diane's. It contained just 3 words. I miss you. Some wounds might heal after all, given enough time and space. My father had taught me that buildings require proper foundations to withstand the pressures of time and elements. Perhaps families weren't so different. That evening, I made 2 important calls. The first was to my architecture firm in New York, accepting a modified partnership arrangement that would allow me to continue splitting my time between cities. The second was to Walter Grisham, instructing him to establish a college fund for Diane's grandchildren, Alex's kids, in Robert Reed's name. Small steps toward rebuilding what had been broken, not erasing the past, but creating a future that honored it while allowing for new growth. It seemed a fitting tribute to the man who had taught me that the most enduring structures are those built to adapt and evolve. As I packed for my return to New York the next day, I placed my father's chess set carefully in my luggage. The game he had begun was complete now, but new games awaited, and thanks to him, I was ready to play. The Chicago skyline glittered against the evening sky as guests filled the rooftop garden of the newly completed West Side Community Center. String lights twinkled overhead, and the spring air carried the scent of blooming plants from the sustainable garden, a living symbol of the neighborhood's revitalization. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patricia Winters announced, tapping her glass for attention. "As chairperson of the Reed Construction Board, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the official opening of Phase 1 of the West Side Development Project." Applause rippled through the crowd. Community members, business partners, politicians, and Reed Construction employees all gathered to celebrate the milestone. I stood near the edge of the gathering, taking in the scene with quiet satisfaction. 1 year after my father's death, his vision, expanded and evolved under my guidance, was becoming reality. Emma joined me, resplendent in a deep blue evening dress. "They're about to call you up for the speech," she warned with a smile. "Ready?" "As I'll ever be," I replied, straightening my tie. Public speaking was always Dad's strength, not mine. "You've gotten better," she encouraged. "Besides, this crowd is already won over. Look around. Everyone's impressed by what we've accomplished in just a year." She was right. The first phase of the development had transformed the once-abandoned industrial site into a vibrant mixed-use space. The community center with its rooftop garden, affordable housing units, local business incubator spaces, and workforce development facility had all been completed on schedule and under budget, a testament to the revitalized Reed Construction team and the project's importance to the neighborhood. Patricia's voice cut through my thoughts. "And now, I'd like to invite Nathan Reed, the visionary behind this project, to say a few words." As I approached the podium, I caught sight of Alex and Vanessa standing together near the front, both offering encouraging nods. Our relationships had evolved dramatically over the past year. Not perfect by any means, but founded on mutual respect. That would have seemed impossible during those tense days after Dad's funeral. "Thank you all for being here tonight," I began, surveying the diverse crowd. 1 year ago, this site was an abandoned industrial complex, a reminder of Chicago's manufacturing past without a clear path to its future. Today, it stands as proof that development can honor a community's history while creating opportunities for its future. I paused, collecting my thoughts. My father, Robert Reed, began this journey with a simple belief that buildings should serve people, not the other way around. He saw potential in this neighborhood when others saw only decay. He envisioned spaces where families could afford to live, where local businesses could thrive, where community connections could strengthen. Several longtime employees nodded in recognition of Dad's philosophy. In the back, I spotted Walter Grisham, raising his glass in silent acknowledgement. What you see around you today is the result of many hands and many minds working together, I continued. The architects who designed spaces that feel both modern and welcoming. The construction teams, who built with precision and pride. The community members who shared their needs and hopes through countless planning meetings. The investors who understood that sustainable development means sustainable returns. Emma beamed from her spot in the crowd, her contribution to the project's success impossible to overstate. Beside her stood Marcus from Crawford and Mitchell, whose faith in our vision had helped secure the necessary financing when other firms balked at the project's community-focused components. This development represents something rare in today's world, a true partnership between business interests and community needs, I said, warming to the theme. The affordable housing units aren't an afterthought or a concession, they're central to the project's purpose. The business incubator spaces prioritize local entrepreneurs. The Workforce Training Center is already preparing neighborhood residents for careers in construction and property management. Mayor Wilson, seated in the front row, nodded approvingly. His administration had fast-tracked permits and provided tax incentives after seeing the project's potential impact on one of the city's underserved areas. As we celebrate this milestone, I want to share some news about the future, I announced. Thanks to the success of Phase 1, we're accelerating the timeline for Phase 2, the restoration of the historic Marshall Factory building into a technology innovation center with educational facilities for local students. Murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. The Marshall building had once employed hundreds of neighborhood residents before closing in the 1980s. Its restoration would honor that industrial heritage while creating new opportunities. Additionally, I continued, the Robert Reed Foundation is establishing 10 full scholarships for neighborhood students pursuing careers in architecture, engineering, and construction management. My father believed that talented young people should have opportunities regardless of economic background. These scholarships will ensure that the next generation of builders reflects the diversity of the communities they serve. Vanessa, who had taken on leadership of the foundation with unexpected dedication, smiled proudly. The scholarship program had been her initiative, developed through countless conversations with local educators and students. Finally, I'm pleased to announce that Reed Construction will be opening a training institute in the Phase 2 development, providing apprenticeship opportunities and certification programs for construction trades. This institute, led by Alex Reed, will help address the skilled labor shortage in our industry while creating career pathways for those who might not pursue traditional college education. Alex looked surprised at the public announcement of his new title, Reed, not Hargrove. We had discussed the possibility of him taking his stepfather's name to solidify his connection to the company's legacy, but he hadn't yet made a final decision. My use of the name was deliberate, a public acknowledgement of his place in the Reed family and business. My father often said that buildings outlast their builders, I concluded. What we create here will stand long after all of us are gone. Let it stand as testament to what's possible when business success and community benefit are treated not as competing interests, but as essential partners. Thank you. The applause was warm and genuine as I stepped away from the podium. Mayor Wilson immediately approached to shake my hand, followed by a stream of well-wishers and congratulations. Through it all, I found myself thinking of Dad, wishing he could see what his vision had become. Later, as the formal program concluded and guests mingled throughout the rooftop garden, Alex found me near the edge, looking out over the development site where Phase 2 would soon begin. "Read, huh?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "That was unexpected," I smiled. "Too presumptuous?" He considered for a moment. "No, it felt right, actually. I've been thinking about it more lately. Dad, Robert, was more of a father to me than my biological father ever was." "He would have been honored," I said sincerely. Alex leaned against the railing, his gaze taking in the project spread out below us. "The Training Institute is a big responsibility." "One you're ready for," I assured him. "Your proposal was excellent, practical but ambitious. It addresses a real need in the industry." "I've been talking to the community colleges about partnership opportunities," he admitted. "There's potential to create certification programs. That would have real value in the job market." "See? That's exactly the kind of thinking it needs." I studied my stepbrother, noting how much he had changed in a year. The entitled arrogance had been replaced by earned confidence. The shortcuts and manipulations had given way to genuine achievement. "Dad would be proud of the man you've become, Alex." Emotion flickered across his face. "I hope so. I wasted a lot of years trying to be something I wasn't, the heir apparent, the natural successor. Turns out I'm better at building educational programs than running the whole company." "Most people never find their true calling," I observed. "You have. That's success by any measure." Vanessa joined us, champagne flute in hand. "The mayor just committed to expediting permits for Phase 2. Said the impact metrics from Phase 1 were impossible to ignore." "That's excellent news," I replied. "Your community engagement strategy made all the difference there." She smiled, accepting the compliment with newfound grace. "The foundation work opened doors. People trust us now because we followed through on our promises." The transformation in Vanessa had been perhaps the most surprising of all. The foundation work had revealed depths of empathy and organizational talent that had been hidden beneath her previously brittle exterior. She had found purpose in philanthropy, building relationships throughout the city that benefited both the communities served and Reed Construction's reputation. "Have you told him?" Alex asked her with a meaningful glance. Vanessa hesitated. "Not yet. It didn't seem like the right moment." "Told me what?" I asked, curious. "Mom called yesterday," she said carefully. "She's moving back to Chicago next month." This was unexpected news. Diane had remained in Florida for most of the past year, communication limited to occasional formal exchanges through lawyers and brief strained conversations with her children. "She's buying a condo in Lincoln Park," Vanessa continued. "Said she realized Florida wasn't home after all." "Is this a peace offering?" I asked cautiously. Vanessa shrugged. "Hard to say with Mom, but she did ask if you'd be in town for the summer board meetings. Said she'd like to meet for coffee if you were amenable." I considered the implications. The wounds of our conflict had begun to heal, but Diane had been the most resistant to reconciliation. Her financial settlement had been generous by any standard, but the loss of status as Robert Reed's widow and company matriarch had struck at the core of her identity. "Coffee might be a start," I said finally. "Neutral ground." "That's what I told her you'd say," Vanessa replied with a small smile. "She's different now, more reflective, less concerned with appearances." "Grief changes people," Alex observed. "Sometimes for the better, once you work through it." The conversation was interrupted by Emma, approaching with excitement. "Nathan, you need to come quickly. The mayor wants to discuss fast-tracking the technology center permits if we can incorporate a public education component." As I excused myself to follow Emma, I caught sight of Grace Martinez chatting with Patricia Winters near the bar, two women who had stood by my father and then by me during the tumultuous transition. Their loyalty and wisdom had been invaluable throughout the past year. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of conversations, connections, and congratulations. The project's success had exceeded even my optimistic projections, establishing Reed Construction as an industry leader in sustainable, community-focused development. The company's reputation and financial position were stronger than ever. As the event wound down, I found myself alone on the rooftop garden, the last guests having departed. Chicago stretched out before me, its lights reflecting in Lake Michigan, like earthbound stars. Somewhere in that urban landscape was my father's spirit, not just in the buildings that bore his company's name, but in the approach to construction that valued quality and integrity over quick profits. "Quite a view," said a voice behind me. I turned to find Emma, her heels in her hand after a long evening of networking. "The best in the city," I agreed. "I was talking about you," she said with a gentle smile. "Watching you tonight, the speech, the conversations, the vision for the future. You found your place here." Over the past year, Emma had become more than just a project partner. Our shared passion for the development and long hours working together had gradually evolved into a deeper connection, one that neither of us had planned but both now cherished. "It's been an unexpected journey," I admitted, slipping an arm around her waist. "When I flew in for Dad's funeral, all I wanted was to say goodbye. I never imagined staying, taking over the company, continuing this project. Sometimes the paths we resist are the ones we needed all along," she observed. I thought about the dual life I'd created, the architectural practice in New York that I still maintained through regular visits and virtual collaboration, and the leadership role at Reed Construction that had reconnected me with my father's legacy and my hometown. "New York is still home in many ways," I said, "but Chicago has reclaimed a piece of my heart this past year." "Just a piece?" she teased, leaning into me. "A significant and growing piece," I clarified with a smile. "The frequent flyer miles are worth it." We stood in comfortable silence watching the city lights. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Phase 2, planning meetings, quarterly financial reviews, design consultations for the technology center. But tonight was for appreciation of how far we'd come. "Your father would be proud," Emma said softly. "Not just of the project or the company, but of how you've handled everything. The family conflicts, the business challenges, the community skepticism. You've navigated it all with the same integrity he valued." I thought of the chess set in my downtown apartment, the game he'd left unfinished, now completed, a new game set up in its place. Life moved forward, patterns repeating but never identically. "I found something last week," I told her. "Going through some old storage boxes in the company archives. A blueprint from the very first building Dad ever constructed on his own. A small office project on the south side." "Is it still standing?" I nodded. "Renovated several times, but the bones are his." What struck me was his signature in the corner. He hadn't developed that distinctive R yet, the one that eventually became part of the company logo. It was just simple block letters back then. "We all start somewhere," Emma observed. "Exactly. He was figuring it out as he went, just like I've been doing. There's something reassuring in that. He didn't have all the answers when he started either." A security guard appeared at the rooftop entrance. "Just wanted to let you know I'm doing final lockup in 10 minutes, Mr. Reed." "We'll be down shortly, Frank. Thank you." As the guard withdrew, I took one last look at the development spread out below. The community center with its sustainable design features, the affordable housing units with their distinctive terrace gardens, the small business spaces already showing signs of life with interior build-outs underway. 1 year, I mused. Hard to believe. With many more to come, Emma reminded me. Phase 2 is just the beginning. The technology center, the education partnership, the workforce housing expansion. We're building something that will evolve for decades. "We," I repeated, appreciating the word. Not just Emma and me, but the entire team that had coalesced around this vision. Alex with his training institute, Vanessa with the foundation, Patricia and the board, Grace and the operations team, the construction crews and architects and community partners, each contributing their unique strengths to a whole greater than its parts. As we left the rooftop garden, I paused at the commemorative plaque near the elevator, a bronze rendering of my father's face alongside his favorite quote, "We build, not just for today's needs, but for tomorrow's possibilities." Tomorrow's possibilities stretched before me now, bright with promise. The path I'd resisted had become the journey I now embraced, connecting my father's legacy with my own evolving vision. The company, the development, the healing family relationships, all works in progress, all requiring continued care and commitment. But tonight, standing in a building that existed because of choices made in the aftermath of being locked out of my father's funeral, I felt a profound sense of rightness. Life's most difficult moments sometimes open doors to unexpected opportunities, if you were willing to walk through them. "Ready?" Emma asked, holding out her hand. I took it, stepping into the elevator that would carry us down to ground level and whatever came next. Ready. The doors closed on the rooftop garden, but the view of both the city and the future remained clear in my mind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight had confirmed what I'd been slowly realizing over the past year. Sometimes coming home wasn't a retreat from the path forward, but the beginning of a new, more meaningful journey. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.